Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hope everybody's doing well. Y'all had the week off last week. Should have got caught up on all of your schoolwork. Okay. I have muted everybody, so you can unmute yourself. Well, welcome back to Mels 603. This is session 9, week 10. We're past the halfway point now. So we should be well into finishing up the OMA and moving to the skip. I got a couple of skip task ones in today from Tyler. And who else did I get one? I got one from Tyler and I got one from Tar River. And so that would have been Sonia. And they were both great. So, and I talked to Tyler by text today for moving through that. So looks like everybody's got the gist of that. Hopefully everybody's got the gist of the skip and are moving on from the OMA. Please remember, I want to share my screen. Please remember on your OMA, let me share my screen, make sure I'm recording here. Nate said the week has kicked his butt. Wait till you get to be my age and see how your week goes. Let's see here. Don't forget, as you complete your tasks for the OMA and then later for the skip, and you put them in discussion board for me to give you feedback. When that happens, don't forget to go to the assignment drop boxes and put them in here to get your score. And also, so here's task 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the final one together, and then the screenshot of what you got when it got graded in task stream. This is how you get your points right here. Also, the peer reviews that you do for other folks, you put them on their thread so that they can get your feedback, but also make sure you come to the Dropbox here and put them in here so you can get your points. So here's all the things that you should have for the OMA. You should have 3 peer reviews to get 100 points each. You should have 4 tasks and then a final and a screenshot. So by the time you get through with that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You should have 9 different things that you can get points on in here. Plus you get points in discussion board as well. And the same for the skip. And so when we get through with all that, you'll see that that comes out to the percentage that evidence work, which is 40% of the course should be in that, and that's where it is. So make sure you're getting your points. All right, so next week, if I'm looking at the schedule correctly, let me pull up the schedule. Next week, we're going to do personnel, and then the week following that, in November, we're going to do case study 3. So I'm going to wait to next week to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you generally about case study 3 tonight. I'm going to mention a couple things. We'll talk more in specific next week. You should be getting ready to start putting your group together. The next person who taking turns being the leader of the group and getting ready for case study 3. But the thing that I want you to specifically hone in on case study 3 is 2 things. Make sure you read carefully and understand Heckler's veto. Heckler's. Heckler's veto. It's in your book. What is Heckler's veto? Heckler's veto is when you punish me for the actions of somebody else. Wait a minute. What? When you punish me for the actions of somebody else, or to try to avoid the actions of somebody else. So students, for some reason, have a little hard time understanding this concept. So somebody comes in the school business and says, if that person comes to the prom, I'm going to harm them. Rather than punishing the person who made the threat, who threatened the harm, The response is to, well, we won't let that person go to the prom. We're looking out for them. We're protecting them. No, you're punishing them for the actions of somebody else. So you got to make sure that you understand heckler's veto. All right. The second thing is FERPA. And the reason why I wanted to make sure I mentioned that tonight, these are both kind of concepts that we're going to get to tonight. FERPA is the federal law that protects the privacy of students and their data while in school. FERPA says that Tanya's child, who's in my school, when Jimmy comes in and is mad and wants to talk about Tanya's child, I can't talk to Jimmy about Tanya's child. I can't even if they were involved in an incident, I can't say you got the same punishment as your child. I can't be discussing somebody else's child. That's a privacy issue. So in this case, as you will see, some parents came in to complain about two other students, and the principal engaged in a conversation with those parents about another person's child. You need to make sure that you understand FERPA laws. For some reason, and I'll stop my share and then I'll go back to it. For some reason, folks have this notion that FERPA is just about records. It's just about exceptional children and their physical records, their what we used to call their cumulative folder. No, FERPA is much, much more than that. It guides your behavior while you're in school. And that's one of the things that's under tonight's lesson. And so let's look at that. This kind of jumps off into that. And that's the reason why I wanted to make sure these two issues will come up in your next case. You need to be paying attention tonight to these things. They will inform your decisions. So let me share my screen. We'll go to session 9. And there's a link in here. Now watch it not work. It worked earlier today. No, it still works. Yay. All right, so Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. We most commonly associate this with exceptional children, but it's so much more than that. We have frequently asked questions, purpose for parents and students, K-12 school and post-secondary. Protection of pupil rights, guidance and notices of filing a complaint. Is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. Now, that just doesn't mean they're written records, but it has to do with, did you give this child punishment? Did you talk to this child? Have you counseled this child? Have you conferenced this child? All of those things. We can't talk about anything with parents except their children. And so there is a good explanation of FERPA right here. Frequently asked questions. Let's go see if that one will work tonight. Here we go. Okay. Can a student take a course anonymously? No, we have to know who it is. All right. Are educational agencies and institutes required to notify parents and eligible students of their rights? Absolutely. And we won't go through all these things. Our law enforcement records are not education records as such. So those things, because they can publish you in the paper, but we can't talk about those things. See that's the one that gets us in trouble, because parents can read police reports and listen to the scanner. They want to come to school then and talk, but no, you can't talk about those things. You cannot do that. May disclose law enforcement third parties without the parent or eligible student's prior written consent. So although it may have been in the newspaper, it may have been on the scanner. When a parent comes running into your building, did you know Johnny got arrested over the weekend for drunk driving? He had a gun in the car. I'm scared. You can't talk about that. So you need to make sure that you explore that FERPA website so that you know what you can and can't do when parents come gangstering into your building. Because the next two case studies that we have, this one and the last one, both involve parents basically storming the Bastille. In this case, they're mad about student behavior. In the next case, they're mad about teacher behavior. And that plays a big part. Dealing with our stakeholders is a big part of what we have to do as school leaders. You need to know the rules, whether they're mad at a student's behavior or they're mad about the teacher's behavior in terms of their instructional modality. We're not talking about, a misconduct of some kind. We're talking about what happens when parents don't like how your teachers teach. That's the one that can get you in trouble as well. So make sure that you get on and explore that purple website. So your activities this week were to find out about the intervention model at your school, MTSS, and to observe a IEP meeting. So I'm going to do those in reverse order, and then I'm going to go to Dr. Sane, who's going to do the bulk of it tonight. He didn't know that, but I'd kind of cautioned him already. IEP meeting, the takeaway from IEP meetings, as you know, is it doesn't matter how much planning time your people put in and all the hard work and the testing and all of that. They bring all those things to the meeting. And one of the things that happens is they think because they did all the work, they get to make all the decisions. That is not correct. Those IEP meetings are collaborative between three different parties. One, the parents, they have to buy in. Two is the EC department that brings those recommendations forward. And three, the LEA representative. That's the person who represents the school district. Usually that's an assistant principal or a principal. Now, if you're unlucky, you'll draw that short straw and you'll be the LEA person and have to do all those IEP meetings because your principal miraculously has a meeting somewhere else when they all occur. It's amazing how that happens. And so, but you've got to understand that each of those three constituents play a different role. But when you come to a decision, it's a collaborative decision between all three of you. You have to understand that. You don't just come in and say, here's what we say we're going to do, and we're going to go do it. That's not how it works. You have to understand that. And you need to see that dynamic, how that dynamic works. Yes, Sonia.
That also depends upon the age of the student.
Mm-hmm.
The student is 18 years or older. They don't even have to have their parents there. They can make choices and decisions in their own IEP.
Right. Yeah, but
So,
that's the same. The parent or the student is the constituency.
Right.
Now, I would say this now, you got to be careful with what you just said. And I was going to get to that. I probably would have forgotten it, but I'm glad you reminded me. Now, here's the thing that you got to understand under North Carolina law.
Mm-hmm.
The age of consent in North Carolina is 16,
mm-hmm.
except if you're mentally incapacitated.
Right.
Then there is no age of consent. You got to be careful with 18-year-olds because obviously they're exceptional children.
Right.
The deal is if they are self-contained EC, even if they're, and we keep those until their 22nd birthday. Is that right, Sonia?
Yes.
We keep those kids until, we keep those until their 22nd birthday. If they are self-contained and are not mainstreamed, and if they are not in an inclusion model, if they're in a separate room all day by themselves, they cannot represent themselves at an IEP.
No, they still have to go under the guidelines with the parent.
That is correct. So you got to be careful of that. You can't just say, well, they're this old, let's go. And that's the same thing for a due process hearing. If a kid has done an infraction of the disciplinary code and they give them a 10-day suspension and they're up for a long-term exclusion or an alternative school placement, even if they're 18 years old, if they're self-contained, and even if it wasn't a manifestation of their disability, they went through the whole Deck 5, manifestation determination, functional behavior assessment, did a psychological, updated the IEP, and whatever they did was found not to be related to their disability, a function of their disability, you still have to have a parent there with them if they're self-contained. That is correct. Now, that's the kind of stuff that catches you out. You're not paying attention. I'll give you an example of a disciplinary case. I think I probably told you this before at North Meck. 16-year-old girl was having sex in the bathroom with boys. The school didn't call the police. They wanted to handle it in-house. They did their own investigation and said, well, she was a willing participant, so no harm, no foul. Except her mother went public with it, and it come to find out she was self-contained DC. Yes, she was 16, but you don't have that. They can't consent no matter what age they are, and the law is very clear. It says that's age of 16 unless they're mentally incapacitated. And it was police threw them under the bus, and principal and AP had to go home. Well, my wife used to say, well, where'd they go, honey? I said, well, they could have went home. They didn't have to, but they can't stay here any longer. They can't work for us. And so that's the kind of stuff you get into. So you got to know that those caveats. But the big part of FERPA is you learn a lot of those things through FERPA as well. But the big thing about IEP meetings is that everybody has a seat at the table, and you've got to know that. Somebody put something in the chat about regular ed teachers going to those meetings. Regular ed teachers are usually there just for background and content and to answer questions about the kid. They do not represent the LEA. You have to be at least an assistant principal to represent the LEA, the district that you're in. You have to be at least that.
I also remind them, Dr. Lamb, that the regular ed teacher, preferably, it's not just any gen ed teacher. Preferably, you would like to have a gen ed teacher that teaches the student.
Yes. Well, otherwise, they really shouldn't be there.
Right.
That's kind of understood, is you can't just go down the hall rounding people up. The only reason that a regular ed or a gen ed teacher would be there is to give context and background on the student, their performance in their class. That's a privacy issue as well. We can't just round up anybody that comes along and let them come to these meetings. They have to have standing, is what we call it legally. They have to have legal standing to attend that meeting. They're one of the three constituencies. They're either the parent or the student, if they're old enough, the LEA rep, and the representative from the EC department. They all are constituents in this thing. For anybody else to attend, they would have to, under what the law is called, is they have to have standing. That means they teach the kid and they have the information. Otherwise, you can't just be rounding up people to bring to a meeting to round out the field or to get more votes. That's not the way that works. So you have to be careful with that.
Dr. Lamb, can I just echo what you just said?
Yes.
And make sure that everybody heard that loud and clear. One of the things that I see assistant principals who are typically the SNAs or the special needs administrators, the mistakes they make all the time is they believe that those IEP meetings, the dates are set in stone. Therefore, if the teacher cannot attend, then therefore they've got to go find someone. And then it typically they usually do it with the most contentious parents. And when a parent who is contentious has an advocate, that is the time when you want to reschedule the meeting. So everything that you just said, and then just know that every IEP meeting can be rescheduled, even if it's down to the wire. I would rather lapse in compliance than have someone who doesn't need to be at the table. And guess who that all falls on? You all as future assistant principals. You are the ones that have to manage that and make those decisions. At the end of the day, going out of the 90-day timeline is much better than going in court and getting your rear sued because we brought the wrong people to the table. All right, I'm off my soapbox now.
No, that's I don't know what it costs now. Every time we used to do that in CMS, that was a $12,000 mistake. I had a regular checkbook, $12,000. I'd write about once a week.
Yeah.
For folks making those kinds of mistakes. Then you want it to be about the kid and the learning or not learning rather than the process. And unhappy parents will find any way they can to make it about the process, not about the content of what you're trying to do. And guess what? If you give people a stick, they'll beat you with it. I mean, that's the handiest thing. That's the handiest way to get what they think they want. They'll claim a FERPA violation. They was talking in the lounge about my kid. Somebody saw their record. They said this, they said that. There was a teacher in there that came by the room that doesn't teach my kid. I'm telling you that that's the easiest way to get what you want, is to claim there was an error in the process, especially a confidentiality error, because that one is so set in stone. There's no wiggle room on FERPA, folks. There's no gray areas. There's no judgment call. That's not the case. So you need to dig deeply into FERPA to make sure that you understand all of it. The student's record's not just a piece of paper. It has so much more than that. And as Dr. Singh said, if you're that representative, and see, now it will be up to you as the LEA rep to actually put the meeting on. You are the one who convenes the meeting and then turns it over. Now, again, that doesn't mean that your vote counts any more than anybody else's. And it doesn't mean that you and the EC person can outvote the parent. Doesn't work that way either. And that's one of the things that I wanted Dr. Singh to talk to us about tonight, because he's involved with this. What happens when the parent just absolutely says, no, I don't agree with the school's recommendation?
So there's each district has a little different process.
Mm-hmm.
However, the big answer is that we comply with, when the parent refuses services, then we don't provide services.
Mm-hmm.
We make sure that we provide services through the core academic instruction. So we maintain the student through tier 3 interventions, and we try to provide as close to that specially designed instruction as possible. But if the parent says no, that we refuse services, then the student does not have an IEP.
Now, Keisha said documenting the minutes and prior. Now, every district doesn't do that, by the way.
Okay.
And when I say that, there's two other options here. And I've worked in 2 districts that I've worked in 4 during my career. Couldn't keep a job, obviously, but the wealthy districts do it a little bit different than the poorer districts. And I hate, we talked about funding last time. This is what we're talking about.
And I've only been in the poor, so.
Yeah. And so I started out in the poorest of the poor, and we didn't even do intervention. If you didn't want EC services, we appreciate your time, but we don't have anything for you, because we were dirt poor there. Now, I went from there to another place and ended up in a place where we had special POPs coordinators that would check on those kids and make sure that they got the services that they needed, even though they weren't in our EC program. But we had enough money in Charlotte to do that. So you've got special POPs coordinators there that are not technically EC. I hate doing air quotes. I'm gonna put my hands up. They're technically not EC. They're special POPs, special populations coordinators, that make sure that that kid gets what they would have gotten in EC. But that's only for the wealthiest of districts. What Dr. Singh is talking about, 90% of you, that's what you will have. Either you're so dirt poor you don't care if you get sued and give them nothing, or you're so wealthy you can pay for it on your own by that way. But 90% of you absolutely will do exactly what Dr. Singh said. You will maintain that level 3, the intervention tier 3, with that kid and give them what you can, but that's pretty much it. So Nate had a question. Nate, go right ahead. Nate, did I lose you? There
Sorry,
you are.
No, you answered my.
Okay, very good. So, and I'm glad, Nate, if you got a minute, I have a question for you.
Oh, I got plenty of minutes. Go ahead.
All right. In charter schools, where do y'all fall in terms of, on that spectrum? Are you like 90% like Dr. Singh's, or are y'all like CMS where y'all will do it anyway and pay for it locally? Or are you one of those that if they say no, they get nothing?
Well, we have MTSS within our school. We have
Right.
a multiple teal support system in our school. We got a coordinator. at our school, I've been in many IEP meetings, and what I said earlier was like, if you're a regular ed teacher and you say yes to one IEP meeting, they always tend to ask you for every IEP meeting if you have a student, because you're an easy go-to. But from the ones that I've witnessed, parents usually at our school don't refuse accommodations. In fact, we are the opposite end of that spectrum, to where we are trying to move kids from IEPs who are in the upper grades, like juniors and seniors, into 504s.
Right.
Okay, we're going to apply some of those collegiate accommodations for them later on, because an IEP won't transfer to the college setting.
That is correct. 504. We do have accommodations for 504 at the college level. We don't for exceptional children. So that came up this week in graduate school. There was a lady in a doctoral program that claimed she couldn't write her dissertation because she was learning disabled. We don't have that in college. Sorry. And so exactly, you're trying to transition them out. And parents sometimes don't want that. Some parents want more, some want less.
They really don't like that. We get a lot of pushback, actually, and the guidance counselor, I think, really appreciates me. She's she's our 504 coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
She really does appreciate me coming in, because I try to advocate for the student that they can achieve these goals, even if we put them in a 504 setting. They don't have a one-on-one, maybe they have a curriculum assistant class now incorporated into their schedule. So we it's honestly, when it comes to those stakeholders, it's like I said, it's almost like sales. You tell them what they need to hear and what they want to hear, but you tell them how it is. Honestly, I find that to be the best situation. Usually I have a good rapport with the student anyway. And you go in and you kind of just, you just have to word it correctly. And if you do 1 and 2, by the time you're doing your 5th or 6th one, you kind of got a groove, and you almost have a made up script in your brain when you go through kind of what you want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
but no, we've never had a parent say, no, we don't want accommodations. Or if they say no, we kind of maybe reword it and say, hey, well, what about this? Here are our options. And we give them options, because sometimes parents are uneducated and don't know all those options that their child does have. But then they'll ask for something silly like, oh, can my student have earbuds in? Is that an accommodation? You're like, no, that's not an accommodation. You can't have music playing in your kids' ears, while you're at school. Noise canceling headphones. Now, there you go. Now we can work with something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the issue is, and we circle back to again, is know the law, know what your district provides, know how it works in your district. As I said, 90% of you will do exactly what Dr. Singh was talking about, but that doesn't mean everybody will. There are some other options that you have, and you can kind of go a different direction. But I like what Nate said. With the older kids, one of the things that you want to do is less accommodations and more move them over to 504, because that will translate to the collegiate level. It does not. EC does not. Now, that lady that asked for the accommodation this past week in the doctoral program, if she'd have said, I have a 504 plan, well, we've got the Knoll Center for Disabilities that would have worked with her. But we don't have learning disabled. We don't have exceptional children. So you've got to know those things. All right. So we know what the IEP meeting looks like. We know what everybody's role is again. Don't be letting people in that don't belong there. Like Nate said, those are students that he teaches, and so that's why he's there. He's the go-to. But he has to know the student. You can't just be a spectator there. And part of what you also have to know is the EC people will know what the range of services they have. You can't just out of the blue, and I've had this happen, by the way. A young AP just said, the parent said, I want this. And it wasn't one of the choices that the EC department offered. And the AP said, well, that sounds good to me. Let's all go home. Oh my. Oh my. I mean, and guess what the parent wanted? Wanted homebound. We didn't offer homebound in that district. What are we going to do now? So you as the LEA rep, you got to know that the EC people know what the range of possibilities is. You should learn those as well, but you need to know, don't go outside of your role, stay in your lane, and don't be offering irate parents something so that you can get them to agree, or you can get out, or you can go home, or whatever. Like Dr. Sane said, cancel the meeting if you have to. You can always do it later. That's better than violating the law or giving them something that your district doesn't provide. If they're not willing to go, or if you can't go, then cancel the meeting and reschedule. But don't be offering things up that you think that the parents would make them happy if that's not something that your EC department has offered in that variety of services. Do not do that. That's the worst thing you can do. Is promise homebound for a kid, and you don't provide homebound services. Your district's too poor to do that. One of the poor districts I worked in could not do that. And quite honestly, I had a kid that was having emotional problems, and I took his homework by every day. I was principal of the school. He didn't live far from the school, so I'd take his homework, drop it off, and pick it up every day. But we didn't have homebound services, so you can't be promising those things. All right, so now we've got a handle on IEPs, on IEP meetings, and so now let's talk about intervention. Now, Dr. Sane is going to talk about. I've got a kind of a synopsis of a 3-tier MTSS system that's under tonight's. We're going to talk about that. But here's the thing we're going to talk about mostly is the intervention system at your school, whether you've got 1-tier, 2-tier, or 3-tier. Everybody's supposed to get to 3 eventually. We kind of got delayed because of COVID. But shortly here, everybody's going to have all 3 tiers, and each tier is 30. So when a child is referred for exceptional children's services, there's a 90-day process, 30 days of anecdotals, 30 days of the first treatment, 30 days of either more of that or a different treatment that child gets. Now, they're referred to, I call them treatments, but they're different learning systems that are different modifications that you would try with that child. Let's just call them a treatment. In the world of research, we call you have programs, treatments, or fixes. And so this would fall under the treatment level. We're talking most specifically, intervention programs are up to 90 days prior to that 90 days. They do not run concurrently. Let me say that again. That's a bad mistake that you can make. The 90 days for your school intervention, MTSS program, whatever you want to call it, care team or whatever, that 90 days runs prior to the 90 days for the standard EC program, referral program, prior to making an EC testing decision. So it's 30, 60, 90, same thing. And then a referral for exceptional children in 30, 60, 90 again. They do not run concurrently. Now, you say, well, Dale, it looks like the same thing, pretty much. But here's the big difference. And this is about, and again, this is about losing your house. So pay attention to this part. If something goes wrong on the EC side, you have an EC department, you have a coordinating teacher, you have a department chair, you have a EC department in your district. And if something goes wrong, usually it's on them unless you do something stupid. And if a kid's not getting his IEP needs met, or if he misses the head count, or his reeval's not done, that's on them. Kind of blows back on you a little bit, but that's on them. The intervention team at your school is what the state refers to as a school-based committee, SBC. What does that mean, Dale? That's kind of random. No, it's not random. Better understand this. That means if something goes wrong with that 90-day intervention prior to that 90-day EC, it comes back to you and you alone as the school principal. There's nobody between you and the bear. And if you poke the bear will get you. The principal is solely responsible for making sure that that intervention team has delivered that 30, 60, 90 with fidelity as the district has laid it out in their plan, period. There's no coordinating teacher. There's no EC. Those people might come to your intervention team, but they've got no liability. You have all the liability as the school principal. If there's one thing at your building in terms of meetings and paperwork and that kind of stuff that you better take a personal interest in as a school principal, it's that intervention process, because you are solely responsible for it, period, to make sure that what you provide your school is what the district says that they're going to get with fidelity. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sane now. I warned him earlier that I was going to do this, and he's going to talk about the 3-tier intervention system in his school district. And it's going to be pretty much what you have, or will have fairly soon.
Yeah. So, so in Lincoln County, one of my roles is to oversee our district MTSS system. And again, like Dr. Lamb said, they're all pretty similar, but they all have their different rules and procedures. But again, this all came out of the recent legislation from the state on July 1st, 2020, specifically for specific learning disabilities, where they eliminated the discrepancy model. And that's basically where really the way you qualified a student for an exception or a disability is, it was a 15-point discrepancy between educational testing and a psychological testing. So North Carolina transitioned in 2020 to this response to intervention method, which brings in those 3 level of tiers. Now, we've had RTI for many years, and it's a good practice. It's sound instruction, but again, now it's closely tied to this specific learning disability policy through our Office of Exceptional Children. So in Lincoln County, I'm just gonna, because I could talk about this for hours, and that's the last thing that y'all want to hear. I'm just going to give you kind of some big takeaways and some big pointers as future assistant principals who are going to be overseeing this process. First off, if you get hired at a school that has an MTSS coordinator, which a lot of our schools are slowly starting to get those. I never was fortunate enough to have one as an AP or a principal, but make those people your best friend. But also don't put it all on them. You still, at the end of the day, oversee that process. And the second thing is, and this was actually in that document on Blackboard that you posted, Dr. Lamb, but when we are in the intervention process, as soon as you suspect a disability, it immediately goes to what? Anyone want to take a guess? Does it stay in regular ed or does it go somewhere else? We are a lively bunch tonight, aren't you? It goes to EC. When you suspect a disability, you start that. That's kind of that transition over to EC. So I caution my assistant principals that we're not doing this intervention process because we suspect a disability. We're doing this intervention process because the kid is performing below grade level. We're wanting to try and close that gap. But as soon as we see that gap isn't closing, regardless of all the resources that we're putting in, then we should suspect. And there's a lot of advocacy, I can't say that word, advocacy groups out there that have recently come up saying that schools are delaying referrals to special education because we have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step process. And that's the biggest misconception that I want you to leave here tonight is that there is a lot of people out there that think a student must go through tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 before they can ever be referred. That is not the truth. If you have a student who moves in, let's just say they move in and they are significantly discrepant 3 or 4 grade levels below, we don't wait 90 days to put them through every step before we refer them. You refer them because we suspect you need data to back up your decision, but then you move toward the steps. So remember, interventions are there to close the gap, not to refer until we suspect. Jennifer, you have a question? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Jennifer, let's see. We didn't hear you. Is there a certain amount of time you want intervention to take place? Now,
Go ahead.
From my perspective, and again, I haven't been in it in a long time. I'm sorry, Hermione. 30 days for me. That's what I often recommend. That you're supposed to do 30 days of remember, the first 30 days is not of intervention. It's of anecdotals. You're collecting data, you're observing, you're looking at the test discrepancies. For me, you ought to know that at the end of 30 days, whether this kid an intervention is going to help them or whether we need, we need to not pass go and go, we need to go ahead and start. To me, but I wouldn't want to go to court with less than 30 days. Now, Dr. Sane may have a completely different experience than me.
No, we say 6 to 8 weeks, which would be 30 to 40 days. That's kind of our sweet spot. That also allows us to have enough progress monitoring data to see if that rate of improvement. The state loves to use these two words, and that's one of the things you're going to also learn when you become an AP or a principal in the future, is that the state loves to give you these fancy words, but no guidance in exactly what they mean. And so one of them is rate of improvement. Okay, that means that the student, what is the student's rate of improvement or the fact or their rate of regression, but nobody tells you what that rate of improvement should be or what it should not be. You as school districts have to figure that out. And that's where we're talking about every district has different data decision rules with what rate of improvement means. Then they come in and they talk about inadequate academic achievement. Well, based off of COVID, you could look at a majority of our rosters and see that most students are not performing where they should be. So what does inadequate mean? Is it 2 grade levels below? Is it 3 grade levels below? And what I found out of those things from DPI just over my years with working with them and continually asking the questions, why, what does this mean? Is it's basically you compare the students to like peers or to similar peers, and you determine whether you're going to suspect disabilities based off of that when we make those comparisons. So those are and then again, the state also throws out terms like significantly discrepant and all of those things. But the biggest point that again, if you listen to anything that I say, it's we intervene to close the gap. And when the gap isn't closing, then we suspect. And really, that gap should start closing within a 30-day window. There's a ton of research out there that shows that, if it's not starting to close in 30 days, then it's not going to close in 60 days. It's not going to close in 120 days. So then you're really delaying the services that the student may need. So anything in particular, Dr. Lamb, that I left out?
No, that's exactly, that's perfect. That's exactly, I mean, these are the kind, these are the kinds of questions that students have, and yeah. If you have more, this is the time to ask. Remember, it's kind of like when we talk about personnel next week. The law is the same for everybody, but every district interprets it differently in terms of who will do that part of due process. See, that's what we're talking about. I told you everything always comes back to due process. What are they supposed to get, and what do they get? What they're supposed to get, as we know, is substantive due process. What's the substance? What are they supposed to get? And then procedural is, what did they really get? Right. That's where you can't have a gap in there. That's where you can't say, well, they were supposed to get A, B, and C, and we didn't give them any of that. Yeah. Now, EC is going to be bad enough. It's going to lap up on you, but intervention is going to get you because you're responsible for intervention as a school principal, not the EC department. And so, yeah, MTSS person or RTI better be your best friend. Right. And so, and just to kind of merge the two or talk about the two in the same sentence here, is that this is kind of a growing trend that, and I mentioned COVID and inadequate academic achievement, but you've got parents coming out of the woodwork making parent requests for EC services or parent requests for EC evaluations. And so the processes that we use in Lincoln County, and most districts will do this, is that parents can request for an evaluation to be conducted, but that does not mean that they get the evaluation. There is a big misconception amongst several schools in my district, and I know it's across the state, that parents have the ultimate say. That is not the case. If there is not data to support that student needs special education services, then we have an initial IEP meeting, but the process stops there. Those are hard conversations.
Nate talked about parents sometimes not wanting their kids to not have services or lose their IEPs as they get closer to college. Well, parents who truly believe that their students have a specific learning disability and they come to the table and you show them data that says otherwise, those are hard conversations. And what I've experienced over the past 2 years is that several of the assistant principals in my district, and I've talked to them about this, so I'm not talking about them, but they do not want to have that hard conversation. So they just give in to the parent. And on the flip side of that, our case numbers for EC are overloaded. We're referring the wrong students. And guess who's quitting at an astronomical rate? Every EC teacher across our district, because their caseloads are too big. And then those same assistant principals come to me and say, okay, Josh, I need you to fix this problem. Can you come out here and do these IEP meetings? So you see how it turns into this cycle, that if data drives our decisions, you cannot argue with data. And parents, and Dr. Lamb referenced this, parents are one person or two people on an IEP team. They don't make the decisions. And they can throw around lawyers, they can throw around advocates, but as long as we make our decisions about what's best for kids and data, then we win. Just make sure you got the right people and the real teachers that teach the kid in the meeting. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you touched on something that I get every semester when I have this night. Somebody says, well, we don't have to do any of that if the parent just says, well, I want my kid tested. I can't tell you how unbelievably stupid that is. That is nowhere in the law. Dr. Sane, if you would address that for us, please.
Yeah, you still have to, I mean, even if a parent comes in and says they want their student tested, you still have to provide a preponderance of evidence. You still have to show that there is a rate of improvement, that they're not going to close their gap. You as the school have to provide the evidence to actually determine the eligibility of a specific learning disability. So, and there's a lot of teachers who there's so many ways you can, there may be behavior kids, but a lot of teachers, on a separate phone call say, oh, just write a letter and we'll get them some EC services.
Yes.
And that doesn't matter anymore. I mean, with the old policy, maybe you could slip a couple through because all you had to look at was the discrepancy between two tests. But now it is a preponderance of data that drives decisions. You still have to collect it. You still have to intervene. So the process still happens. It's just on a more condensed timeline.
Yeah. So here's the standard conversation that used to happen back in my day. Ring, ring. This is Stu. This is Dale. I teach your kid in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 8th grade. Whatever. I teach them math. They're gonna fail. What you need to do is call the school or write a letter and tell them you want them tested for EC, and they'll get in there and your kid won't fail. That used to happen on a daily basis, where basically teachers were trying to get the kid out of their room, or you didn't want to have to deal with them, or didn't want to have to teach them. And so 99% of the parents who came in and demanded EC testing is because a teacher had prompted them to do so. And so one of the things that you've got to do with your faculty is tell them, don't do that. If I catch you doing that, it's going to be 40 lashes with a wet noodle. Number one, don't do that. But number two, you're not telling them the truth. It's going to be at least 30 days. It's going to be at least 30 days. There's not going to be an automatic testing. And now you can't count concurrent either. Now that's another thing that teachers believe. Well, if you've been doing MTSS, you can just say that was EC and just go ahead and ask to be tested already. And so that's why I said they can't be concurrent. Now you can stop one and go to the other, but they can't be. It's not like time served in the jailhouse. That's not the way this works. But teachers believe that, and they've convinced parents it's time served. No, they can't. The processes can never run concurrently. So because you did this much time in one doesn't get credit for that much time in the other. It does not work that way. But teachers tell parents that, and they tell them, if you come in and show you behind, they'll test your kid tomorrow. No, we won't. We can't. We never were allowed to. I know it happened, but we weren't ever supposed to do that.
So is my microphone working now? I think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
So would that 90-day window for testing start in that situation after your interventions took place? Then when you met and said, yes, we determine there needs to be something happen, and then an additional 90-day window starts for testing, correct?
The 90 days in my district normally starts after the parent signs what we call a DEC 2, a permission to test.
Then it's still 90 days.
It's still 90 days.
Still 90 days.
Not
What I'm talking
90
about,
days
there
after
isn't,
the parent comes
there
in.
is no, we're going to test your kid tomorrow. That is not realistic. I don't care how big you show you behind at school. That can't happen. But teachers will tell them, you know, if you'll come in and show you behind, cuss, tow something maybe, and act a fool, they'll test your kid right away. No, we can't. And even if we switch from the intervention model to the EC model, we still have to do 90 days. So I said they can't run, you can't get credit for one and the other. They can't ever be concurrent. If one stops, that one just stopped. We start the other one then. We don't count that, you know, say you did 30 days in intervention. All right, we say that's not working. We're going to switch over to the EC. You don't get 30 days for time served. You still go back to 90. They can never run concurrently. That right there is 90% of where you get caught and lose your job, is over that kind of stuff right there. That little sticking point about parents coming in and raising hell and want me to get their kid tested, and you do something dumb. So in 2014, just before the start of school in the first week of August, 11 elementary principals either retired or got demoted in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. You can look it up. 2014, 11. Because they were testing kids, having kids tested within a week of referral. Let me say that again. Within a week of referral, they were getting those kids tested. Remember now, Charlotte-Mecklenburg is a wealthy district. They got psychologists, where back then they had them on staff. They didn't have to wait till, you know, take turn. They just have the school psychologist do it. But what was going on was, the problem was, number one, it's against the law, but number two, it was racially identifiable. Guess what group they were testing within 2 or 3 days of the referral? That'd be
African-American males.
Males.
African-American males.
You don't have to be a clairvoyant to know the answer to that one. That's a pretty easy question there. And so what they were doing is they were trying to get all these EC kids that were going to hurt their test scores. They were trying to get them tested right quick so they could opt them out on testing and not hurt their scores. It's exactly what it was. And that was systemic in those schools. So the issue is here, folks, and I'm watching our time. We could talk, I mean, I could talk this stuff all night. The issue is there's been so many abuses around exceptional children that this is going to be the one area that you're going to be monitored in more than any. Even more, I used to say your money or your honey. You know, if you misspent the money or if you did something inappropriate with, with somebody. But I'm telling you, you will be monitored closer on EC now than anything else, because it's been abused so much in the last 45 years. Well, since 1975, how many years that is? How many years is that? 47 years. Yeah, 47 years. For the first 40 of those years, it was awful in terms of the stuff that was done. And so every abuse that you could imagine happened. And so we're trying to clean that up, or, as a society. And so you just know that you better know the rules and you better follow them. So we had a hand raised, Anisha, Akeisha, I'm sorry. Akeisha, you had a question?
I've seen it. I work at a school now, but before I worked for the preschool evaluation center. And so what parents would do, because they would want their child to go to school. And
Right.
the only way you can do that in North Carolina is through NC Pre-K or EC services. Some counties do a lot of Title I. So what they would do is that they would bring in an outside evaluation from wherever, whatever, that they got a doctor to sign off on, bring it to us, and we say, okay, we understand your outside evaluation, but we still need to, you know, screen, test, come in with our own evaluations and see. And then we have our teacher that goes out and monitors the child in the setting that they're in, especially if they're in a daycare and all, and parents would get completely mad. And they would, because they knew that the possibility with this outside evaluation and them just looking at deviations like what you were talking about, by the time the school system got finished, they might not find those deviations and their child couldn't go to school. And the biggest thing is now is that these children have been home with their parents. It seems like the parents make it seem like forever, and they want them to go somewhere for free.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the years that I was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, you know, Charlotte-Mecklenburg still has 4 of the original Smart Start preschools, federal, what you're talking about. They're scattered across the county, strategically across, and they've got like 1,200 kids in them, but that's not enough. And so that's why you have all these other pre-Ks at elementary schools all across the county, because they want their kids to go to school. And they'll actually harm the future academics of their child just to get them some free daycare. So now I have an example of the other end of the spectrum as well. Please remember that gifted are exceptional children too. That's a federal program under the Exceptional Children's umbrella. Now, when I worked in the first of the very low wealth districts that I worked in, we couldn't afford psychologists or any of those kinds of things. Lord, we could barely afford to keep the power on. And so what the well-to-do parents in that district, and you know, in the county seat, even in the poorest counties, you have some well-to-do parents, because back in those days, we didn't have privates or charters. And you have the courthouse and the hospital at the county seat and out in these rural counties. So that means you have doctors and lawyers, and they have more wherewithal than the normal parents. They don't have a private school nearby or a church school or any of that. So a lot of them back in those days were in public school. And so they would go and pay a psychologist to do testing to get their kids put in exceptional in gifted programs. Same thing. They wanted their child in a gifted program, and they knew that if the school tested them, it would take a while, number one, but number two, that, you know, the outcome might be in doubt. And so they would pay to have that done. And so you need to make sure you know what your district's policy is on outside testing, and make sure that you, whether it's either end of the spectrum, whether it's gifted or whether it's, you know, for exceptionalities on the other end, you need to know what that is. But again, all that's part and parcel. Every district doesn't have a Dr. Sane that oversees this stuff. Some of them, if you got the EC department, that's it. And then you don't have that liaison person who knows school administration to help you out. The poorer districts don't have that. The wealthier districts have more. You got to know what the substance of the due process is in your district. I can't put all these forms up and tell you, because every district's going to be different. You've got to know what it is for your district. And then the big deal is to make sure that you follow through with it, that you don't promise things you can't deliver. You don't offer at home or, you know, homebound services. You don't offer stuff that's not on the menu, that you don't, you know, get a kid tested next week so the parent will quit calling you or coming by your office raising sand all the time. You got to make sure that you know what the law is and that you follow. And the thing about it is, surely there's somebody, no matter what district you're in, that's as knowledgeable as Dr. Sane, that works in your district, that can give you guidance on where to do and what to do. So that's the thing about this. I could sit here, so we could spend a dozen nights, and I could go through all the manuals and the books, but it's more specific. You got to find out what's going on in your district. You need to talk to that intervention person. You need to talk to your EC chair and know what they're supposed to get and how it works in your district and who's responsible to follow up with each piece of it. It's going to be the same way when we talk about personnel next week. It's the same thing. The law is the same for everybody, but how it's carried out is specific to your district, and you've got to know that. That's where the issue comes in. Again, make sure you understand FERPA before our next case study. Make sure you understand heckler's veto. A lot of what we talked about tonight falls under that heckler's veto. Somebody coming in yelling and screaming, wanting their way, and then you end up harming somebody else because of it. That's what we're talking about. These are concepts that come in the next case study that are biggies that you should have. Nate, you got a question to finish us up tonight?
Yeah, I got a quick question. We recently at my school had a parent come in hooting and hollering because apparently there had been some shoving in our hallway. And she was like, this child pushed my child. I want to see the tapes. And she was very, I don't want to say belligerent, but she was badgering my principal right in front of everybody, just wanting to see the tape. And he's like, I can't show you the footage because other students are on there who aren't even involved. But I mean, he took her, he guided her into obviously the room there, the little conference room. And then Officer Duarte, our SRO, was involved because I mean, she was quite irate. Honestly, I get it. I'm a parent too. If your kid gets pushed and you want to figure stuff out. But how does a principal or somebody of administration, how do they, now, if that parent is like, I need to know what happened to my child, like, what can you disclose to a certain extent?
Not a lot.
That's what I figured.
Other than we're aware of what happened, we processed the incident, and appropriate action was taken.
Okay.
That's I used to have my APs rehearse that little script.
Yeah.
Don't deviate from the script.
That's right. Okay.
And I've had, can I chime in here for a second?
Sure. Tyler does this every day. What do you do, Tyler?
I don't know, hopefully not every day, but I have had this, have had this situation happen. And anytime I watch footage, if it's something like that, my SRO's in there, both of them probably, and another AP or another administrator. So when my SRO's in the room with me, I say, and he kind of chimes in too, he's like, ma'am, I've seen the footage. I saw the exact same thing. And for some reason, I mean, that carries more weight than it does with me. So when I've had that happen, that's definitely helped me.
How many times you heard me say call the law?
Yeah.
Yep.
Always involve your SRO. They're sworn to tell the truth. And exactly, Tyler's exactly right. You should always have an SRO when you're doing those tapes. That would be my standard practice. And have them, and absent that, another administrator, or maybe I tell you who always did a good job for me. When I was an elementary person and did not have a, we had back in the day when we had those old bus cameras, and of course it looked like something from the 50s. Of course it was the 80s, but it looked like something from the 50s. Was a guidance counselor. Your guidance counselor, if you don't have a SRO handy, for some reason people believe guidance counselors. They just think they're the best people in the world. If you got one of them, especially now, don't get it. God, this is an awful thing to say. Don't get a young one. The older guidance counselor you got, the better. It's good to be old sometimes. The older one that you got, if you got one that's kind of like Miss Stroud, who's kind of grandmotherly, oh boy, she'd have them apologizing before they left. See, that's the one you want. Everybody believed her. Everybody loved her. I mean, she was like an institution in the community. And if she said that it was Thursday, and even if it was Friday, it was Thursday because Miss Stroud said so. So if you've got somebody like that, and it always ends up being like a counselor, but for some reason, parents are pejorative. If you're under the age of 30, you don't exist. I hate to say that, but that's the way parents treat you, that you're not a fully formed adult yet. So those folks aren't a big help to you. I'm just telling you how the world works, folks. I'm not saying it's right. It ought to be that way.
It's all about that image.
It's exactly right. It's all about the image. You know, but if you've got an older counselor that's grandmotherly, boy, that's a winner right there when angry parents come. I'm telling you, that's a winner. That's the one you want. But if you have somebody under 30 years old that says like 17 times in the first 3 minutes of the conversation, oh, you're losing that one, folks. You're going to be in court. You're going to be down at the superintendent's office. That's not going to go well for you. That's just the way it works. That's real life. But Tyler's exactly right. Especially if you're in a high school or a middle school, if you can bring that resource officer in, that's killer. If you're in elementary school, get the oldest guidance counselor you got. That's Dale's advice. I'm telling you right now, that's exactly what I would do, and I've done it. That may not be politically correct, but folks, it works. And there's nothing wrong with that. You've not done anything illegal, immoral, unethical. You know, that's you use what you got. You use the tools that you have. Dr. Sane, you did a great job tonight. I appreciate you as always. You close us out. We'll be done.
I just at our last principals meeting said this, so it's one quote and take it as you hear it. AIG is one lawsuit away from being EC. Make sure you know your AIG plan and you serve those students just like we serve the students who are below grade level. Have a good night.
Thank you. We'll see y'all next week and talk about personnel. Thank you as always. More of you talk. I love it.
Thank you.